Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down a bunch of spoilers that came out today for Modern Horizons 2. Now, we're going to be taking a look at these from a couple different perspectives, but generally it's going to be from a casual player who mostly plays Commander and knows a little bit about Modern. So we are going to kind of see these cards in maybe a different light than some other channels are covering, just because, it is Modern Horizons, the main focus is Modern, but I am not super versed in the Modern meta, so I think it's a little bit of an interesting perspective. Either way, let's just jump into this. Starting off, we have this card, which can be translated to General Ferrus Rokrick. It is a 3-cost red and white legendary creature, human soldier, 3/1 with hexproof from monocolored, meaning if you have a monocolored spell, it can't kill it, which actually is a pretty big deal. I mean, when you think about some of the more iconic kill spells, they're often going to be monocolored. Of course, there are, multicolored kill spells, Utter End, Anguish Unmaking, lots of multicolored ones. However, there are a lot that are monocolored, and they've become so popular because they can fit in so many decks because of their monocoloredness, and so that's actually pretty big. Then, it says, whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. Alright, so this is a 3-drop that creates 4/4s whenever you cast a multicolored spell. It's not the first time we've seen, multicolored as a theme, but I think that it is very, very powerful. I mean, 4/4s are pretty big. It's not 1/1s, it's not even 2/2s, it is 4/4s, which are huge, and it's not the first time you cast one, and it doesn't have to be a certain size. If you cast a multicolored spell that costs 2 mana, you get a 4/4, and 2 mana for a 4/4, pretty good rate. You add on top of the fact that you're also casting the spell, and I could see this being kind of a interesting commander. It is not necessarily what red and white typically do. Normally they're more focused on combat, versus this allows it to be a little bit more value-based, which I think we are seeing a lot more of recently, and I think that's really cool. Either way, let's talk about Soul Snare. So this is a reprint, so it'll be new to Modern, and it's a 1-cost enchantment, and you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to exile target creature that's attacking you or a planeswalker you control. Alright, so in my opinion, it's a little, not unintuitive, but it's a little bit of an extra step. You play this, and then later on you can, play it. Now, looking at it, it's really good in Commander, hence why it was printed in a Commander set, because it's kind of this deterrent, don't attack me. But in Modern, it could have some really interesting uses in decks that care about enchantments, decks that care about devotion, anything like that, just because it does have that versatility, or something that can keep bringing this back from the graveyard. So those are the kind of places you're going to want to look for in Modern when looking for a home for this, now that we know it will be legal. Next, we have a Gaea's Will. It's a sorcery that doesn't have a mana cost, but you can suspend it for 1 green, meaning essentially you pay a green, and then 4 turns later you get to cast the spell for free. And it says, until end of turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. If a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card instead. By the way, this will include Gaea's Will, so it will exile itself. It's not like you can continuously play this. Otherwise, you could theoretically, pay 1 mana, 4 turns later, it casts Gaea's Will, and then you can cast Gaea's Will out of your graveyard for that, but it does exile itself. This is a very powerful effect. We've seen it with things like Underworld Breach in red. Of course, this is a little bit different. It's in a color that typically gets that style of effect where you are able to cast things from your graveyard, but it is very unrestricted. It's not like you lose life. You just get to kind of play from your graveyard, and I think a lot of decks are going to want this. I do think the fact that Suspend 4 does cause some problems. Are you casting it and then realizing, having to wait 4 turns for your plan to play out? Are you planning 4 turns ahead? Are you, what is happening? Are you playing it and hoping you find something within 4 turns? I'm not sure. 1 mana isn't a huge investment, and as long as you have something in your graveyard, it is kind of cantripy. So I could see this definitely seeing a decent amount of play, especially in Commander. Next, we have Junkwinder. It's a 7-cost blue creature serpent, and it has affinity for tokens, meaning that it costs 1 less for each token you control. It does not say creature tokens, meaning you could theoretically, have it be a like a treasure token or a gold token or a food token. But yeah, it makes it cost 1 less. And then whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So this isn't anything super amazing or flashy, but it is continuing the blue caring about tokens theme, which we saw a little bit in Strixhaven, and I think that's pretty cool. Next, we have Seal of Cleansing. This is also going to be new to Modern. It's a 2-cost white enchantment, and you can sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So it's very similar to the other seal we saw. Very interesting, kind of the same thing I said before. Decks that care about enchantments, decks that care about devotion, pretty good in those. But outside of that, I don't know how much you're really going to play it. All right, next we have Quirion Ranger. It is a green creature, Elf Ranger, 1/1 for 1, and you could return a forest you control to its owner's hand and untap target creature. Activate only once each turn. So, you know, this doesn't have necessarily the potential to go on infinite, because it is obviously activating only once each turn unless you're bouncing it, but it does have some really interesting applications. Both sides of these are really good. Untapping a creature, really good, can generate you a mana. Returning a forest to your hand can generate you a mana. You know, if you tap a land to play something, and then you tap a mana dork to tap something, and then you bounce the land back to your hand to untap the mana dork and then replay your land, you essentially generated 2 mana with this card. But also, you have to remember this with like landfall is pretty good. Every turn you can guaranteed hit your land drop, or if you have ways to have more land drops, this is really good. And so I could see some really interesting decks that focus around using this card. But of course, it is also not a new card, it is a reprint, so those older formats already have this. Next, we have Disapprove. It is a 2-cost blue enchantment with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So it's kind of cantrippy here, except it's an enchantment. But it says creatures lose all abilities, yours and your opponent's. At the beginning of your next end step, sacrifice it. So very, very cool. Basically what this is going to do is you're going to say, hey, wait a second, I don't like what's going on here. I'm going to get rid of all abilities from all creatures until basically end of turn, but it's done in enchantment form. Again, for, you know, either if you want to mess with it a little bit, or it's also just easier to remember that this effect is in play. Yeah, pretty awesome. In my opinion, it is a little different than what we would normally see. You're not countering anything, but you're essentially countering things. So if you have that person that's going infinite, you can say, actually, no, your creatures don't have the ability to do that. And so it's something that we don't often see a lot of on this, like in this style, I should say. Next, we have Imperial Recruiter. So this is also a reprint. It is a 3-cost mythic 1/1 creature human advisor. And when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a creature card with power 2 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. It's an effect we really don't see that often in red, and it is a very good version of the effect. And so, you know, it is, first off, an expensive card, so it's going at mythic. It also has this borderless art, which is looking pretty cool. Next, we have Tormod's Cryptkeeper. This is a reference to Tormod's Crypt, which is normally a 0-cost artifact that you can sacrifice to exile an opponent's graveyard. This is a 3-cost 3/2 with Vigilance that you can tap and sack to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Pretty important that has Vigilance, because it means you're not afraid to attack with it, because this would be kind of useless if it didn't, because you'd be like, well, I want to save this open, save this in case I need to exile things. But I think it's really, really awesome because of the fact that it has Vigilance. And I mean awesome for a common. It's not like the most wild card in the set. Next, we have Arcbound Muser. It is a white artifact creature cat 0/0 with modular 1, meaning if this creature enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, when it dies, you may put its +1/+1 counters on target artifact creature. See, it looks like we're going to see a little bit of modular as a theme. We've already seen some pretty cool cards for it. It looks like it might be white-red, and yeah, looking pretty awesome. This card in particular is nothing to write home about, but I'm excited to see what they do with that theme. Next, we have Rift Sower. It is a 3-cost green creature elf druid, 1/3 with Suspend 2, and then you can tap and add 1 mana of any color. So you can either make this as a kind of overpriced mana dork, or you can kind of have this be an overpriced mana dork that you're getting late. I don't like it. Either way, you're pretty much getting it turn 3, and I would rather have my mana on turn 2. However, you are getting it at the beginning of turn 3, meaning you can't even use the mana until turn 4, which at this point I feel like is just not that great. Of course, Suspend 2, maybe you can mess with that a little bit, but I don't really feel like that's necessarily worth it. All right, next we have Glimpse of Tomorrow. So another card that doesn't have a mana cost, but it's a rare sorcery with Suspend 3 for double red. So, you know, you play this turn 2, you get it turn 5. And it says shuffle all permanents you own into your library, then reveal that many cards from the top. Put all non-aura permanent cards revealed this way onto the battlefield, then do the same for aura cards, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is a like Scramble-verse style of effect, but for 2 mana. That's normally like a very expensive card, but it is also only your stuff. So you're going to say, hey, I have, you know, 5 lands, 2 creatures, and a Planeswalker, and you're going to shuffle them into your library and then essentially get an equal number of permanents. But the thing is, you're not getting an equal number of permanents. You're just revealing that many cards from the top of your library. So like you could have 8 cards and then reveal 8 non-lands and you just board wiped yourself. So it's not generally a good effect. However, also your opponent see it coming, so they can do things about it. So I just don't love this card, but it's cool that we're seeing a little bit of this like card with no mana cost and then suspend. Next, we have this card, which is another one with no mana cost. I'm just going to call it Asmore. I do not even want to try to pronounce it, but essentially it's a legendary creature, human wizard, 3/3. So it's a 3/3 for, I don't know, but it says as long as you've discarded a card this turn, you may pay black or a red to cast this spell. And whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card named the Underworld Cookbook, which we'll talk about here in a second, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Then you can sacrifice 2 foods and target creature deals 6 damage to itself. So essentially, the reason that it doesn't have a mana cost is so that they could fit the name, but they worked it into kind of the card by saying, hey, you got to discard cards. So in a deck that cares about it discarding cards, that's pretty interesting. And then it gets this other card, which is called the Underworld Cookbook. And this is available in the normal frames. It was just spoiled in this one. But it is a 1-cost artifact that lets you tap to discard a card to create a food token. So you can basically turn your cards into a 2-cost spell that gains you 3 life. Not great. But if you were wanting to discard cards, for instance, to cast your commander or want food for your commander's ability to turn it into removal, that's kind of interesting. And then you can pay 4 and tap and sack it to return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Overall, not my favorite card, but if you're looking for a discard outlet and want to then resurrect creatures from the graveyard, maybe this is an interesting kind of commander for you. However, I will mention that this set has a theme of madness, so for a madness deck, this team is perfect. You're discarding a card, getting value for it, and then able to cast it for its madness cost. So in that perspective, pretty awesome card. Next, we have Discerning Taste. It's a 3-cost black sorcery, and it says look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You gain life equal to the greatest power among creature cards put into your graveyard this way. Pretty generic effect. It's a common. Let's just move on. Next, we have some common lands. So these are a new land cycle, and they are artifact lands that are indestructible. Now, I read a little bit about how these were designed. They also, by the way, all enter the battlefield tapped and tap for 2 colors. It's kind of cool that we're seeing more artifact lands, but the reason they have indestructible, a little interesting fact, is that the set is full of a lot of artifact removal because there are a lot of artifacts. What happened was essentially these lands would just constantly get removed. And so this is like purely for a limited thing, but I think it leads to some actually really interesting like gameplay abilities, like the fact that you could maybe run a deck with a lot of these and then like board wipe everyone's lands, and that's not very fun, but it is something that you could theoretically do. It's not our first indestructible land, but there really aren't many, so I think that opens up to some interesting possibilities that I don't know if I'd necessarily want to see, but are technically there. Next, we have Out of Time. It is 1 white for an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, untap all creatures. Then phase them out until Out of Time leaves the battlefield. Put a time counter on Out of Time for each creature phased out this way with Vanishing. So, here's what you do. You basically put your thing on the board, and it doesn't have flash. So, very, very weird. Then you're going to untap all creatures. And this is, by the way, not all creatures you control. It's just you're phasing out every single creature on the entire battlefield. And then essentially it sticks around for the number of creatures removed. So if you phase out 17 creatures, this thing will disappear 17 turns later. But if you phase out 2 creatures, it comes back 2 turns later. And it doesn't have flash, so it's not meant to save your board. This is kind of like a temporary board wipe, which I feel like is so weird and interesting, and I'm sure there are some niche use cases for it, but I don't know when you would want to run this. I mean, you can pay 1 mana and destroy everything, but then again, maybe you're running a deck that has a bunch of ETBs, and this works as a board wipe, and then once the board wipe disappears, you get all your stuff back. But then again, do I want to be getting rid of my stuff? I'd rather just get it back right away. I kind of wish it was like, I don't know, you get to choose which creatures phase out, but then that becomes really broken. So I don't honestly know what the purpose of this card is, but I do think it has some interesting potential. Okay, and really quickly before we move on to the next card, I do want to, I thought of something really fast. This does have a lot of value, and I didn't see it at first. So this gets around indestructible, first off, for 3 mana. It also gets around like the ability to not be exiled, but I don't know if any cards have that. But more importantly, it gets around commanders. Right now, if you phase a commander out, you don't have the option of putting it in the command zone because it's not changing zones. Therefore, you know, like, this is a board wipe that says your commanders are no mas. No more. You know, like they're gone. And I think that that's really, really powerful. Oubliette is a pretty good actually spell that doesn't see a ton of play in Commander, but it like basically says remove a commander from the game, which isn't necessarily super fun, but it is something that happens. So yeah, just I didn't think of that, so keep that in mind. Also, vanishing, how that works is that, you know, at the beginning of its upkeep, you remove a time counter or a time counter, and when there's no time counters, you get rid of out of time, by the way. All right, let's move on to the next one. Suspend. It's a blue instant, and it says exile target creature and put 2 time counters on it. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. All right, so this is very similar to the previous card, actually, but what this is doing is it's essentially taking that creature out of the game for 2 turns. Suspend says at the beginning of its owner's, at the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from it. When it has no time counters, you may cast it. So if you take their biggest thing and, you know, do that to it, it is pretty, you know, interesting that it takes it away for 2 turns, but it's a 1-mana spell, so you're basically getting rid of something for 2 turns. And unlike the other one where it fades out, like this thing will get ETB triggers. Also, I said in the previous one that you could use it to abuse ETB triggers. Creatures don't activate ETB triggers when they get phased in, so that's not even true. I think the bigger thing is that it gets around like indestructible for 3 mana. Either way, suspend, pretty interesting. You are not suspending an instant, you're suspending a creature in the air, and it's more of an aggressive thing rather than an alternate way to pay spells. I've seen lots of custom cards that work very similar to this, so it's kind of cool to see it like in a real card. Next, we have Mystic Redaction. It is a 3-cost blue enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. Not bad. I mean, it's basically like, what, a third, a fourth of a card every single turn. And then whenever an opponent discards a card, each opponent mills... Whenever you discard a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. So again, playing into that mill matters theme. Yep. And next we have Sweep the Skies. It's X blue for a sorcery with Converge, meaning you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying for each color of mana spent to cast the spell, meaning if you spend just blue, you get a 1/1 Thopter. If you pay red blue, you get 2 Thopters. You know, red green, you get 3, but you know, paying 5 into X, if it's all blue mana, does the same thing as paying 2, or 0 into X, I should say. So you have to keep that in mind. Next, we have Road to Ruin. So how these cards work is that you cast the one that's like normally facing, and then you can cast the second one from your graveyard. So Road is a 3-cost green instant. Search your library for a basic land card and then put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So it's essentially Cultivate, but you also don't get the card in, your hand. Also, it's an instant, which actually does give you some value there. And then Rune is a 3-cost red sorcery with Aftermath, meaning you cast it only from your graveyard. And Rune deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. So essentially how this works is that you're going to get a bunch of lands, and then later on you're going to dome someone, or dome a creature I should say, for the number of lands you control. This actually seems really good to me. It's ramping you, and then it's later a removal spell, which ramp and removal are essential to most decks, and if you can have one on, you know, if you can have both on one card, that's pretty good. So I think actually a lot of Landom decks are going to want this, but even not, I mean, think about it. You are... You know, if you have 5 lands, 3 mana to deal 5 damage isn't amazing, but like it's gonna kill most things, and it was on the back of a removal spell, so, or on a ramp spell. So I feel like this is just really, really awesome. And it would not surprise me if this sees a decent amount of play. Next, we have Mishra's Factory. This is a reprint, so we're not going to talk about it too much, but you can tap to add colorless. You can pay 1 to have it become a 2/2 assembly worker artifact, and then you can tap and target assembly worker creature, gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So very interesting. Lands that become creatures can be very powerful, like in control decks, against control decks, and it just generally, we have a lot of them, especially in Modern, but it is cool to see another one, and this one is kind of popular and famous, and I like this one because it does also have a little bit more versatility if you're working with assembly workers, and can also tap itself to boost itself if it needs to, once, like if it's blocking. So that's kind of cool. Next, we have Skophos Reaver. It is a 3-cost red creature, Minotaur Warrior, 2/3, and as long as it's your turn, it gets +2/+0. So it's a 4/3 for 3 on your turn, and then it has Madness for 2. It's a common. It's clearly here to support the Madness theme. I'm not worried about it. or I'm not worried about it. I'm not super interested in it. Next, we have Sylvan Anthem. It's green for an enchantment, and it says green creatures you control get +1/+1. Pretty good for 2 mana on an enchantment. And then whenever a green creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. So whenever a green creature enters the battlefield under your control, get a 4th of a card, and all green creatures are bigger. Seems pretty good, but I don't think it's broken in any way. You know, it's a little bit of a pretty good value. It's a pretty good value for the mana cost, and it is pretty restrictive into green with, you know, it only boosting green stuff. So you pretty much need to be in mono green for this to be super useful. But I do think it could, you know, run and do some work in those style of decks. Next, we have this card, which can be translated into Torok Dreadchanter. This is a 2-cost legendary creature, human cleric, 2/1 with kicker, black. So you can pay either 1 and a black or 1 black. And if you just pay 1 and a black, he's a 2/1 with protection from white. And whenever an opponent discards a card, put a +1/+1 counter on him. So he's going to be kind of like Tiny Bones, encouraging you to get your opponent to discard a card. But then whenever he enters the battlefield, if his kicker cost was paid, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. So this is 4 mana. Target opponent discards 2 cards at random. Get a 4/3, because when he enters the battlefield, he's making people discard, and whenever an opponent discards, you put a +1/+1 counter. So the fact that he not only gets bigger, but also does an extra effect when he's kicked, this is how I like to see kicker. And I think it's really interesting to kind of see the power level here. I mean, like 3 mana is Mind Rot, and that's not a great card, but the fact that you're getting a 4/3 for 1 extra mana, and the cards are chosen at random, it is definitely better than that. And I'm not trying to say that isn't even a good card at all. But I like it. I don't love cards that obviously like encourage you to make people discard, but I do think that it does what it's trying to do pretty well. And the fact that it's legendary just means people are going to be running more discard-based decks. Next, we have this card, which can be translated into Necromancer's Familiar. It's a 4-cost black creature, bird spirit, 3/1 with flying, and it has Hellbent. Necromancer's Familiar has lifelink as long as you have no cards in hand. That's kind of meh. I mean, you're not really aiming for that, but if you are running like a Madness deck, maybe that will end up happening. And then you can pay black and discard a card, and it gains Indestructible until end of turn, and then tap it. So pretty good, actually. The fact that it can get Indestructible and lifelink means it's a great target to be enchanted or equipped. Like, it can do some pretty good stuff. You know, if you can get a +3/+3 on this is a 6/4 with lifelink and the potential to go indestructible. Awesome. It is very powerful, in my opinion, but not like broken powerful. It's just in the right deck, it's gonna, you know, do work. So, yeah. Next, we have this card, which can be translated into this one because it's a reprint. Scourge Familiar. It has new art, which is pretty cool. It's a 5-cost black creature imp 3/2 with flying, and you can discard a card to add black to your mana pool. Powerful effect, lets you turn cards into mana, and with Madness, which often are going to have cards that give you, like, the ability to cast them, and then also give you mana, then to use that mana to cast them. Pretty awesome. Going to work well in that discard deck, and it seems like they are kind of previewing a lot of cards for that theme today. Next, we have this card, which is Goblin Bombardment. It's also a reprint. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment, and you can sacrifice a creature, and it deals 1 damage to any target. That was errated using the last printing on Scryfall here. And yeah, pretty good. I don't know necessarily how much play this will see in Modern, but it seems pretty good in those decks that are wanting to generate lots of creatures. You might be able to get something kind of working with that, and it's good to see a reprint just because it is such a good card in, like, Commander. Next, we have this card, which is a reprint of this card, which is Seal of Removal. So we've seen the seals, would not surprise me if we see more of them. It is a blue enchantment. Sacrifice it to return target creature to its owner's hand. So it's the same price as an unsummon, but it's an enchantment, which means it can be recurred a lot easier. And it can, you know, count for devotion, count for constellation or enchantments entering the battlefield. Really awesome. Next, we have this card, which is kind of a new card. I mean, it's new to Modern. It was printed in the Mystical Archive as a preview for this set, and it's been actually in MTG Arena's Historic for just a little bit of time now, and it has been doing work for me. But essentially what it does is it lets you choose either non-land or land, and then you look at the top card of your library until you either reveal a non-land or land and put that card into your hand. And then, so essentially what this is it's a 1-cost cycle that lets you choose, do you want to land or an unland? So if you have this in your hand and you realize, oh shoot, I need another land, or you have this in your hand and you're like, wait, I'm flooding, it can guarantee you the other card. And so that's really, really awesome. It's a common Mystical Archives. It was a rare, but I will say it is just a pretty awesome card to use because it can often fix, bad situations that you're in. Next, we have Scurry Oak. It is a 3-cost green creature, tree folk, 1/2 with Evolve, meaning whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if that creature under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So, for instance, if something with either 2 power or 3 toughness entered the battlefield, he would get a +1/+1 counter. And then whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on it, you make a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So that's pretty awesome. Whenever you basically cast a big creature, you get a 1/1 and this guy gets bigger. I don't know how much play this is going to see, but if you already have cards that are putting counters on things, this is not an awful payoff. Next, we have this card, which is Scourge Familiar, and it essentially is a 4/4 for 12, but it costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. So if you, control a forest, a mountain, an island, a plains, any combination of that, it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It can actually cost 0 if you have all of the basic land types, including waste. And there are cards that give your things all basic land types, so those are pretty good. And then you can, basically what it does is it says, each white creature you control has Vigilance, each blue creature you control has Hexproof, each black creature you control has Lifelink, each red creature you control has First Strike, and each green creature you control has Trample. So essentially what this is doing is it is giving each of your things a different stat. So depending on what type of deck you're running it in, you can do different things. I mean, like if you're in a blue deck, this is really good. I think Hexproof is the best mode on this. Now it itself is colorless, so it gets no benefit, but if you can give it colors with like a painter, this can also get Hexproof and also do all these other things. So I think it's really, really cool that it's so versatile. I think colorless cards that are meant to be played, like they play differently in different colors, have a lot of potential to be interesting and dynamic. And it's a mythic, so this one's like supposed to be one of the big ones. Next we have this card, which is Liquimetal Torque. It is an artifact that lets you tap for colorless, and apparently in the translation version, I did not get the mana cost, so it's a 2-cost. So 2-cost, add colorless. We have better with like Arcane Signet, but it also lets you tap and make target permanent and target non-land permanent an artifact, and that is actually really good. If you're running an artifact deck, this is going in it. It's a mana rock, and then if you happen to run into the situation where you can turn maybe your commander into an artifact or something, and that ends up being useful, or even an opponent's artifact, for instance, if you have this and then something that destroys target, artifact, this can destroy any permanent type. And so that's kind of cool. Next, we have this card, which is a reprint of Zuron Orb. It's a 0-cost artifact that lets you sacrifice a land to gain 2 life. It's new to Modern. I don't know how much this is really going to do in Modern, but it is a card that sees playing Commander and things like the Gitrog monster. And it's a card that has not seen a reprint in quite some time, so it's good to see it get one. Next, we have Karth the Lion, and this one's a really interesting one. It's a 4-cost black and green, a legendary creature, human warrior, 3/5. And when it enters the battlefield, or a planeswalker you control dies, you may reveal a planeswalker card from among the top 7 cards of your library and put it into your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then planeswalker loyalty abilities you activate cost an additional +1 loyalty to activate. So essentially, it is giving all your planeswalkers, like if a planeswalker has a +1, they now have a +2. But it also works the other way. If they have a -3, it's now a -2. Or if they have an ultimate that's a -8, it's now a -7. So not only is it helping them tick up, it is helping them kind of get to their ultimate faster by making the ultimate cost less. So this actually seems like a pretty good commander. It also fits in the colors of like Doubling Season. So I could definitely see him going in a deck that's all about getting planeswalker ults. And I think that's kind of cool. I think I said cool a lot this episode. Either way, it's Arcbound. Shikari is our next card. It is a 3-cost red and white artifact creature, cat soldier, 0/0 with First Strike, and it has modular 2, so it's essentially a 2/2. And then whenever it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. And then put a +1/+1 on each artifact creature you control. Yes, that's really awesome with modular because it's letting you kind of take those cards that have modular, and when they die, they move around their counters, so it gives you some extra value there. All right, I'm trying to move through these fast. We have the most cards we've had this entire spoiler season. Next, we have Verdant Command. It is a 2-cost green instant, and it says choose 2. Target player creates 2 tapped 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens. First off, 2 mana to make 2 1/1s at instant speed is already a great rate. And then you can counter target loyalty ability of a planeswalker. And so that's something we've never seen before. Normally we see counter target like activated ability, and that would do that. But this one is specifically getting loyalty abilities. And then you can exile target card from a graveyard, and you can give target player 3 life. This seems really good. It's worst case scenario, it's 2 1/1s. Or if for some reason you can't have creatures, it's 3 life. But it's also often going to sit in your hand and, counter that ultimate, or even counter something that's going to target your creature. Or maybe someone's trying to resurrect something from their graveyard. This just seems like it has so much utility. It seems so great, and it's only 2 mana. And it's instant speed. So this just has so many upsides. I think it's an amazing card. Next, we have this one, which is Terrain Shift. It is a 4-cost green sorcery. It says search your library for a basic land card, and then put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Then you can rebound, meaning if you cast a spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. So normally we see like 4 mana, search your library for 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped. This is that, but it's doing it kind of in 2 waves, which you could argue is both better and worse. It is essentially like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like doing it in 2 things, meaning that if you want to, you can theoretically like get double cast triggers from like Magecraft and stuff, but outside of that, it doesn't have too much of an advantage that I can tell, other than the fact that it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, actually. That is the big advantage here. I did not catch it until literally reading it just one more time. These don't enter the battlefield tapped, meaning this is actually probably significantly better unless your deck cares about those lands entering the battlefield like on your turn. Next, we have this card, which is a 2/2 for 2 with Bushido Tombing. If it blocks or becomes blocked, it's actually a 4/4 for 2, which is actually a pretty good rate, but it's a common. We don't really care too much about it. All right, those are the main spoilers. This video has been ridiculously long, and if you've stuck through it with me, thank you so much. This has been actually a lot of fun, but a lot of work as well. And then there are some Modern Horizons, like old showcase frames that are going to be just the collector boosters. I'm not going to talk about these, but these were the ones that were revealed today. Either way, guys, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe to see more content like this and other stuff as well, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.